Hello, I'm Lyndall Davies. Welcome to a special program, Tsunami Animal Instincts. When the tsunami hit Southern Asia on December the 26th, 2004, it killed over 250,000 people and devastated the environment. It was a terrible human tragedy, but the animals that live here were also caught up in it. From pet dogs to sea turtles to elephants, just like these ones. Each experienced the tsunami differently, but all of them were affected. You'll have seen stories on the news about animals that escaped or even helped people too. Stories about an animal sixth sense. But are these stories true? The program you're about to see is the work of an Animal Planet team that investigated these details over 3 continents. Did the animals know that the tsunami was coming? How do animals react when a natural disaster strikes? And what can we learn from them? Stay tuned for the answers to these questions as we explore a unique story. Tsunami Animal Instincts.
It's just another day in paradise. Summer in South Asia. In a national park in the southeast of Sri Lanka, the morning sun beams down on a peaceful land and all its creatures. On a pristine beach in the south of Thailand, a little girl on Christmas vacation from England enjoys a ride on a baby elephant. The elephant's name is Ning Nong. In this extraordinarily beautiful corner of the world, a market is beginning to bustle as vendors prepare for the day. At this moment, there's no sign of the catastrophe about to strike. But somehow, the animals know something is terribly wrong. For no apparent reason, birds take flight. Other animals head for higher ground. They're all frightened by something. They don't know what's happening, but they know they have to get away. Minutes later, tragedy strikes, shaking the earth to its core. A lone man walking on the beach never knew what hit him. Run! 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 Deep in the ocean at 8 a.m. on December the 26th, 2004, a massive earthquake measuring 9.3 on the Richter scale erupts with unimaginable power. The force of the quake launches a huge tsunami, a tidal wave that spreads with the speed of a jet plane. The swell races across the Indian Ocean, all but engulfing half a dozen nations. It will take weeks to count the dead. The total will approach 250,000 people, the worst death toll from a natural disaster in history. It was a terrible human tragedy, but there's another untold saga. It's the story of what happened to the animals of South Asia. Although many perished in the disaster, most survived. How, in the wake of such devastation, did the wildlife escape?
Soon after tsunami, the overriding priority was to find the survivors and the dead. But although there were body upon body piled along the coastal stretch of Sri Lanka, we found that there were no dead animals.
I think a lot of the animals were showing signs that something was going to happen. We hear that, you know, all over the area of the Indian Ocean from different countries, people saying the same thing, that animals got upset. And we didn't even realize that that must have been a sign that something wrong was going to happen.
Did the animals have some kind of sixth sense that kicked in? Or was it more scientific, survival instincts in action? And once the animals recognised that disaster was imminent, what did they do? The exploration of these questions tells a remarkable and often poignant story. There's no doubt that the secrets of animal intuition have much to teach us.
Over millions of years, the animals have become very well adapted to getting information around them. Information is what they have to have, and they get it in very different ways than we do. And so they have to use other senses like sound or sensing pressure changes or touch, and that helps them cope with major disasters. They know that something has changed in the world around them, and they know what they have to do to be safe.
Some of the best examples of animal survival come from Sri Lanka, the nation once known as the teardrop of India. In the 13th century, the great explorer Marco Polo called it the finest island of its size in the world. Although relatively small, Sri Lanka boasts enormous biodiversity. Its pride and joy is Yala National Park, a wildlife paradise. One of South Asia's most respected and experienced naturalists, Dr. Gihan De Silva, has spent much of his career studying the more than 130 species of animal that live here. The day the tsunami struck, he was an eyewitness to what some are calling the animal's sixth sense. One of his colleagues was the first to notice the animal's alarm calls. It may be proof that in times of danger, all wildlife speaks a universal language.
One of the naturalists was having breakfast, and he noticed that the birds in the entire lagoon took off. So clearly, although there were perhaps 15 to 20 different species, they could cut across the species boundary and communicate in a common language. It's almost as if every human being on this planet, all 3.5 billion of us, spoke a common language.
Even as the tsunami struck, animals seemed to have an advantage.
Another naturalist was fleeing from the waves when before him he saw a troop of monkeys called Hanuman langurs. As the langurs ran through the scrub forest, he instinctively knew that to survive he had to run behind them, because the monkeys would know the surest, safest and quickest way through the jungle to high ground. I think there's something remarkably poignant that at a time when one's life is in the balance, that a human being should rely on the natural instincts of a troop of monkeys.
All over Yala National Park, animals reacted swiftly, giving them just enough time to save themselves.
One of our naturalists was one of the lucky few who managed to climb up a tall tree and escape the raging waters. And as he looked around, he noticed there were reptiles on the tree, lizards and snakes. Now this is not entirely surprising, because we know many reptiles, especially snakes, are sensitive to ground vibrations. So they had another sense which we lacked, which warned them of danger.
Dr. De Silva has known about the fine-tuned senses of animals for years, but he'd never seen their survival skills tested right before his eyes.
People have always realized that animals are important for scientific reasons, for drugs, for recreation, for a whole host of reasons. But we never thought we had to consider animals because we could learn the secrets of survival. There was almost an air of arrogance that we didn't have anything to learn from animals in terms of survival.
In Yala National Park, a few quick-thinking people were saved by watching what the animals did. But our next story is even more remarkable. Animals may have even come to the rescue. Chris Cruz has spent a lifetime on the water. Born in the Philippines and now a professional diver in Thailand, Chris felt he knew the ocean and its creatures about as well as anyone. It would take a tsunami for Chris to realise just how wrong he was. And what he learned that fateful morning may have saved his life. Chris set out at dawn with some tourists to dive off a string of islands on the eastern coast of Thailand. His vessel was part of a small group of boats heading to a spot where the water is crystal clear. The tsunami was already on the way when the divers received some terrifying news.
At around 8:30 a.m. on December 26th, we heard radio reports from the mainland that there has been an earthquake in somewhere in Indonesia.
This was no typical storm at sea. Within hours, everyone knew they were in serious trouble.
Around 10:30, there were like heavy whirlpools forming around. Most of the dive captains said like, we have to get away from this water, and everybody concluded like, we have never seen the water react like this in our whole diving careers.
Then, out of nowhere, the divers spotted a group of dolphins swimming toward them.
There were a formation of like 5 boats all together, and then like there were some dolphins jumping in front, and the dolphins were moving from one boat to the next. They were like all more or less like jumping, just like one after the other, jumping, 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 jumping like that.
Suddenly, Chris realised this wasn't just coincidence. Perhaps the dolphins were trying to tell them something.
My heart was pounding, and I realized like, hey, they're saying something to us. I signaled to the captain to please follow the dolphins. We realized like the dolphins were leading us away from the island.
He'd often wondered about stories he'd heard as a child, tales of sea creatures coming to the rescue of people.
In the Philippines, we have folklore stories, oral tradition stories of like turtles, dolphins, like whale sharks, like helping human beings when they're in trouble, when they're drowning, or like when there's a shipwreck, they're coming.
Chris believed the stories could be true, and it saved his life.
The dolphins were trying to tell us like, hey, what you doing here? Move further out. If we stayed very near the islands, then we would have smashed the island.
Chris's experience that day may seem unbelievable.